What's going on, everybody? I'm just going to let the thousands of viewers to trickle in here. So we're gonna be patient here. We're gonna wait a couple of minutes, and we'll start soon. That was sarcasm. Thank you. Let's get my computer set up here as well. All right, PFR Nation, we're going to get this started here. I'm going to, I know there are thousands of people waiting to trickle into this live stream, so we're gonna take our time on this one. But I thought I would kick this off and just say thanks everyone for participating in the giveaway. For those of you that are new and just catching up, we just hit 1,000 subscribers a few weeks ago, so I just wanted to show my appreciation and do a little giveaway. And given the fact that I don't have any fancy tchotchkes or things to give away, we figured, hey, you know what better thing to give away than real retirement advice from a CFP. So we picked a winner. We also have a runner-up. So just a little refresher on that one. The winner is going to get a comprehensive retirement plan review from my team. So we're going to cover all 5 pillars: retirement income planning, investment strategy, pre and post retirement, tax optimization or tax minimization, incapacity or risk management, as well as legacy. And so we're gonna dive pretty deep. All right, and we typically charge several $1,000s for that advice. So we're gonna give it away for free to one lucky person, one lucky subscriber. And that individual is also going to get access to our financial planning tool that we use day in and day out with our clients. And they will have access to that for free for 3 months. So we'll obviously get all the inputs and the framework ready to go for them. And they'll be off and running for 3 months. After 3 months, we'll hopefully remember to boot them off the system. And the second place person, the runner-up, is not going to get the comprehensive retirement review, but they will be getting access to our financial planning tool that we use with our clients day in and day out. So I'm going to announce those in just a second. But I also want to talk a little about the format we're going to go over today. Obviously, we're going to do the giveaway, which is what I just mentioned. But I also want to kind of tease the podcast episode for next Tuesday a little bit, because we had so many great comments that came into the video, the giveaway video. And so there were so many great comments in there. I figured, hey, like this is actually this is perfect content to do a little giveaway, or not a giveaway. This is a perfect content to essentially do a Q&A session with the comments that y'all put in that video. So you put a lot of thought into your responses. So I appreciate that. And so I'm going to share some of the comments that we're going to highlight in the Q&A session for the podcast next Tuesday. So make sure to follow the podcast. Of course, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss that one. So we'll hit on that. But then, very fascinating stuff here. We're gonna do a back test live, okay? And because one of the comments was related to rescuing the portfolio, rescuing a portfolio when it goes through a downturn. And we've been back testing the lost decade quite a bit, because it seems to me, just based on my research, the lost decade, retiring into 2000, January of 2000, has pretty much been the worst period of time to start retirement. Okay, so, over the last several decades. Okay, with Bill Bengen's 4% rule, he looked at October of 1968 as the worst period of time, but that was 1968. We're talking modern day times, a little different. market today than it was back in almost 60 years ago. So one of the questions that has been popping up a lot is, hey, Kevin, would taking Social Security early rescue a portfolio going through a downturn like the lost decade? So we're going to do a back test live in this video. And so I put together a PowerPoint presentation. I'm obviously not going to be on the whiteboard for that one, but we're going to do a little PowerPoint. And I'm going to show you some of the highlights of that back test. It's going to be really, really good stuff. All right. So without further ado, little drum roll. I don't have any, this is my first time going live here, so I don't have any fancy, sound effects or anything like that. I have no idea what I'm doing. So please, thank you for your patience on this one. But all right, let me start with the runner-up here. All right, let me get on my notes. Drum roll effect on this one here. All right, runner-up is, and I guess I can read the name. I mean, they have their name on YouTube. So at Jeff Miller 000. All right, Jeff Miller. I'm going to read his two responses. So his response to question number one, and just a reminder, is what is your bucket list trip? And if you remember, I did this video on a golf course. So I said, I told y'all, if you're going to talk about a golf trip, that's going to be near and dear to my heart. So you're more likely to potentially win if you talk a little about golf. And Jeff did just that. He mentioned a golf trip to Scotland. Cannot go wrong to taking a trip to the home of golf. So he put in Royal Troon, Carnoustie in St. Andrews. So can't argue with that. I mean, truthfully, that was in the lead for quite a while until the winner took over. But the second answer to the question, so the second part of it was, what is one burning question that you have that keeps you up at night related to retirement planning? And Jeff's answer was planning for sequence of returns risk, that I plan to retire in 3.5 years and where equity valuations are. Thought that was a very thoughtful question, very relevant question to a lot of the content we've been doing on the channel as well as on the podcast. So congrats, Jeff. You're going to get access to our financial planning tool for free for 3 months. I'm going to respond to your comment in that video, and I will put my email in there. Okay. But if you're watching this video, whether it's live or on the recording, just email me at kevin@imaginefinancialsecurity.com. And you can just say, hello, I'm the runner-up, and we'll hook you up. All right. The winner of the giveaway. Now, we've got to do a real drum roll effect on that one. All right, we've got at Lindsay Newell 6319. Lindsay, amazing response. You know what? Right when your response came in, I was like, "This is the winner." I already know this is the winner here. So, Lindsay said his answer to question number one was a week of golf in Ireland with my brother and sister and our spouses, followed by the Ryder Cup at Adair Manor. I don't know if I pronounced that right. He said, he or she said, I retire in next year or so. 2027 will be first year of retirement travel. So that will be the next Ryder Cup is 2027. I moved from UK to California in 1999, and my siblings are still in the UK. So it's best we only see each other once a year. And he mentioned some other golf trips as well in Scotland. So that was right there. I was like, okay, this is a great response. But then the question number two, this is why Lindsay Newell won this contest. Is his answer to question number two was the privilege of complexity due to having a well-balanced mix of taxable and pre-tax savings. Had to juggle things like asset location, withdrawal strategy, timing, ACA tax credits, IRMA, Roth conversions, tax gain harvesting, rebalancing, et cetera, without letting the tax tail wag the dog. And then mentioned close second being healthcare and potential long-term care. So, for me, the thought around that response is near and dear to my heart because it essentially encapsulates like the complexity of retirement planning. It's not one lever you're pulling. It's all of these levers working together to come up with the best strategy for you, because every decision, every plan, it should be a personalized plan. That's why the rules of thumb, great to utilize, great to look at as a benchmark, but you're going to want to pick and choose what resonates with you related to your financial plan. So congrats. Lindsay Newell, amazing response. And obviously coming off the Ryder Cup, I mean, mentioning the Ryder Cup in 2027, obviously, I don't know if you were rooting for Europe, but, as an American, of course, I was rooting for the USA. Not a great showing for USA. Truthfully, not a great representation of America. New York, Beth Page, didn't show up very well. So I know the fans were very rowdy, obviously a little bit intoxicated, but, wasn't very classy, and Europe absolutely put the beating on the United States. But USA, their team, I'll give them credit. Keegan Bradley had him ready for Sunday for singles. And They made it interesting. I watched every match still on Sunday, even though it was a long shot for them to come back. But the Justin Thomas winning, Cam Young winning, those first two matches, kind of gave us a little bit of hope. And then who was it? Russell Henley. Whew! Russell Henley. He had an opportunity to do something and legitimately put pressure on the last 3 or 4 players in Europe. He hit this amazing bunker shot on 18 out of the sand and hit it to like 15 feet. Had a great look at birdie, but then Shane Lowry, the Irishman, came in and absolutely stuffed his wedge 7 feet. So Russell had to make it because a half was not going to do any good. So Russell unfortunately missed the putt, and Shane Lowry won with the winning putt. But anyways, congrats to Europe and congrats to Lindsay Newell for winning. So we'll contact you, Lindsay. I'm going to respond to your comment, and I will put my email address in there. But again, my email is kevin@imaginefinancialsecurity.com. But I will respond to you and just we'll connect over email and get you set up with what you need to get that process started. But really excited to meet with you and see how we can help answer some of those questions you have at a personal level. All right. Giveaway is complete. Let's get down to business today on this one. All right. So let's see. Let me go to my notes, and I've got a PowerPoint's presentation for this one because, like I said, I'm not on the whiteboard today on the iPad. And let me just make sure. Oh, you know what? I mentioned I was gonna read out some of the questions for next week's Q&A session. Let me just read a few of these because I think these were phenomenal questions, by the way. And I'm going to read a few of these, and I probably will split this up into 2 episodes just because there were so many great comments that I want to address, and it's impossible to address these comments in a YouTube comment section, via typing. So that's why I figured, hey, why not dedicate an entire podcast episode? But now I'm saying we're going to dedicate 2 podcast episodes for these questions. So here's one of them that I thought was great. Kevin, I have the majority of my retirement savings in pre-tax accounts. That's like a lot of the folks we serve. So I'm worried about how to do the complex math to optimize Roth conversions before RMDs kick in. RMDs standing for required minimum distributions. Great question. I think probably on a lot of your minds as well. So we're going to address that one in a podcast episode. Here's another one. Kevin, I've set aside in my spreadsheet and calculated my number to self-fund long-term care, but the variables and assumptions concerns me. So we're going to talk a lot about self-funding or buying long-term care insurance. That's a great question. Here's another great one. Should I go into a higher tax bracket, 22 or 24%, to convert my mostly pre-tax retirement savings? Notice the theme there. A lot of pre-tax accounts. This is the majority of the folks that we talk to that are approaching or in retirement. The majority, if not all, of their assets are in pre-tax retirement accounts. Very common. Roth accounts did not really get mainstream until I'm gonna say the mid 2010s. Okay, because I know people were opening Roth accounts in the 2000s, mid 2000s, late 2000s, but really in the 2010s, especially when the Roth account became available in the 401k. Because before, when it was just Roth IRA, you had the modified adjusted gross income that would phase you out of contribution. So you had to do the backdoor, and then the contribution limit was only $5,000 or $6,000, back in the day. So it just wasn't really a big needle mover. But now with the Roth 401k, you can get 50,000 plus into Roth accounts, regardless of your modified adjusted gross income. So I expect that trend to kind of flip over the next 10 to 15 years. But the majority of the folks we're talking to today, 2025, the majority, if not all, are in tax deferred accounts. Here's another one. I think this is a great one on a lot of people's mind. Kevin, my wife is 9.5 years younger than me, and I want to retire in a few years at 55. Love that. Not sure how long after she can keep working, but with that age gap, it's a long retirement timeline. How best do you plan for that? Lots to unpack there. So that's a great one we're going to address in a podcast. But here's another one, behavioral. Actually, the next 2 are behavioral. Listen to these. Kevin, I worry about after a lifetime of saving, will I be able to draw my retirement savings? And then another question that's related to that as well. Spouse is risk averse and scared to spend. Want to help me convince them? Yes, I'd love to help you convince them. Unfortunately, it's not going to be doable unless you reach out to us. But this is very common, where we have, they all say opposites attract. And I think that also bleeds into personal finance and, of course, bleeds into retirement planning, where it's like one spouse may be a little bit more aggressive, maybe a little bit more open to spending down the nest egg, whereas the other one might be the complete opposite, a little bit more conservative. Maybe from an investment perspective, but also from a spending perspective, and they're maybe afraid to start the spending process. So this is not uncommon, but all of those were great questions, and there are so many more. So like I said, I'm going to dedicate probably 2 or 3 Q&A sessions. I might even do that Q&A session from the golf course, a little link side chat for you. So But anyways, thank you all for those amazing questions. And we will be addressing pretty much all of those questions in podcast episodes to come, as well as whiteboard fireside chats to come. So, all right, let's get down to the back test today. All right. So let me first, let me see how I can do this. I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm going to share my screen here. And bear with me here for just a second. From beginning. Okay. Minimize that. I'm going to share my screen with all of y'all here. Hopefully I don't share the wrong screen. Okay, so share window. Okay. Okay. I'm hoping everybody can see this. All right, here's the situation. We've been doing a lot of back testing, and rightfully so. The back testing for me has been great, because this has been one of my beefs with the 4% rule. Is like, we're looking at markets from like the 1930s, 1940s, 50s, 60s, and it's like the 4% rule really stemmed from the worst case scenario beginning in October of 1968. It's like, that was decades ago. What about today? Like, what about the modern day retiree, where the markets are very different, today than they were 30 to 40 years ago, being super top heavy, super tech heavy, and technology is not going anywhere. So I think with the 90s, with the dot-com boom, that was the beginning of this evolution, towards technology. And then you had the dot-com bust, and then enter the lost decade. So we've been doing a lot of stress tests, a lot of back tests using the lost decade. And one of the questions that oftentimes pops up is like, hey, Kevin, like, what if this person, let's say these individuals that retired into the lost decade, let's say their plan was to delay Social Security, but then if they go through some downturns, and we've talked about this, one of the ways to minimize sequence of returns risk is to claim Social Security potentially earlier than you had initially anticipated. Okay, so we're going to go through that. We're going to actually back test. There are 6 different scenarios, and we're going to go through that in just a second. And we're going to meet Mary and just give it a little lay of the land in terms of what her situation is. Okay. So let's see if I can click over to the next slide. Okay. Let's turn the laser pointer on. All right. So let's meet Mary. So her goal is to retire at 60. So that'll be 2026. She's got $2 million. She has $2 million saved. So did a great job saving and accumulating. She needs, based on our financial planning calculation, she's going to need a starting withdrawal of about $103,400 per year in year one. Okay. And that's a starting withdrawal rate of 5.17%. So again, a little bit higher than that 4% rule, but definitely, below that average rate of withdrawal. In Bill Bengen's Trinity study, the average retiree experienced a 7% rate of withdrawal. So on one hand, you've got pretty aggressive rates of withdrawal, but if you did a 7% withdrawal rate beginning in October of 1968, you probably ran out of money very quickly, because 2 bear markets in 4 years, hyperinflation, you know the story. Okay. And Mary's plan, just like a lot of you, is to delay Social Security until 70 because she has longevity in her family. However, she's very worried about sequence of returns risk given the all-time highs in the market. This actually dovetails off of questions that we received in that YouTube video. So what we did is, because we ran the financial planning calculations, but the problem with financial planning calculations looking forward, tying this back full circle, is it projects forward. Okay, it projects forward into the future about hypothetical returns that she might experience over the next 30 to 35 years. Okay, but what if she retired into a market like the lost decade? The lost decade has been the only 10-year period where the S&P 500, after inflation, actually experienced a negative rate of return. It had never happened before. Okay. I think there had been there had been periods of time, maybe over 5 or 6 years, where the market was down a little bit negative, but never a 10-year period. So the lost decade, that's why it's called the lost decade, is someone retiring in January of 2000 through 2009 experienced a negative return. So let's see how her plan works out. Let's see if that 5.17% rate of withdrawal works out. And let's see if claiming Social Security at 70 let's see if claiming Social Security at 62 is actually better than claiming Social Security at 70. So we're gonna walk through those 2 main scenarios. So delay until 70, take it at 62. Okay, so early as possible for her would be age 62. Okay, but we're also going to stress test 3 investment allocations within each stress test. So we'll go over that in just a second here. But the baseline report on this one is start date, January 1, 2000 through 2009 is phase 1. Okay, so we started with $2 million. This is that monthly withdrawal rate, that 103 roughly, broken down monthly. We want to adjust that for inflation each and every year, reinvesting dividends and rebalancing it on an annual basis. Okay. So I say phase one because this is going to be the bridge period. The bridge period is before Mary starts taking Social Security. So she's relying solely on withdrawal. So we call this the bridge period for that reason. Then we're going to stress test or we're going to back test beginning in January of 2010 through year to date. So calendar year to date, we just had September finish. So basically September of 2025, how those portfolios are holding up today. Okay. But the three portfolios we're going to test, we're going to run three different models here. Might be a little tough for you to see, but basically we have the 60-40 portfolio, kind of the tried and true balanced portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% in fixed income. But then we also have the 75-25, 75% stocks, 25% fixed income. And then we have a more aggressive allocation here. I didn't want to go 100% stocks just because that would be a big loser, especially in the last decade. I knew that was going to underperform relative to a 95-5. So essentially the idea with the 5% fixed income is to have that bucketing strategy, to have that sequence of returns bucket, go through the downturn. You don't want to sell your stocks. You want to take from other asset classes. In this case, this individual is going to rely on fixed income. But notice how we have U.S. stock market and we also have international stocks baked into all these portfolios. So it's not just the S&P 500. That's one downside of the 4% rule is Bill Bengen just used the S&P 500. Okay, he did not use the mid caps, the small caps initially. He has since come out and said, we added more asset classes and therefore the safe rate of withdrawal might be closer to 4.7. Okay, but again, that's the worst case scenario. So we've got some international equities. We also have U.S. bonds and international bonds, which definitely helped with some diversification along the way as well. Take a little sip of my coffee here. All right. So kind of to frame this up, we have three allocations for each stress test, delaying until 70, delaying until, and then taking early at 62. And so at the very end, I'm going to stack rank all of these to kind of say, okay, scenario 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6. What was the top dog? What was the second place, et cetera, down the line. And then we're going to talk about some takeaways after that. Okay. So let's run them side by side. There are a lot of numbers on this page. Okay. So don't get too caught up on all these numbers here. But basically what I want you to look at is each of these columns represents each model portfolio, the 60-40, 75-25, and then the 95-5. Okay. This is stocks versus bonds. Starting balance across the board is $2 million. We started with that 5.17% rate of withdrawal in year one, adjusted that for inflation each and every year. So what I want you to look at is $2 million. And then at the end of 2009, what was the value of the portfolio in each of those scenarios? So as you can see if I can mark this up a little bit here. So we've got scenario 1, 60-40 in the lead so far, 1.33, 75-25, 1.1. And then the 95-5 got a little hammered during the lost decade. And, probably not surprising, right? I mean, 95% in stocks. Going into the lost decade, we had the tech bubble bursting in the early 2000s. And then we had the Great Recession in 2008. So that's why it's the lost decade. And no one can predict, hey, are you going to retire into a market like that? That's the challenge, related to retirement planning today. Is you got to sort of balance this idea of longevity risk. The longer you live, the more inflation risk comes into the picture. But at the end of the day, more inflation risk means you need a little bit more in equities to hedge against inflation, and more equities means more uncertainty, more volatility. So that's kind of the balance that we're trying to solve for is what is that risk tolerance versus risk capacity? Okay. But another number I'll throw out here is the time weighted rate of return. This is the actual rate of return. It really is just ignoring cash flows from the portfolio. And as you can see, the 95-5, it actually was positive 1.04%. That's because of that fixed income in the portfolio, 5%. 75-25 averaged 2.69% a year. And then the 60-40 averaged 3.7. So that's why the portfolio has dropped significantly, is because you're pulling 5.17 and then your average rate of return is only 3.7. But we know, because we've done some previous back tests before in the last decade, 2000, 2001, 2002 were all losers for all of these portfolios. So you basically, this individual, Mary, if she retired into 2000, she had 3 years in a row where her portfolio was dipping down significantly and she's drawing down her portfolio. That's why I think a lot of you, PFR Nation, were asking that question. Hey, Kevin, what if a retiree took Social Security a little bit earlier than they had initially planned? So like I said, we'll back test that in just a second. But I want you to try to remember these numbers, the 1.3 million, the 1.1 million, and then the 790,000, because that's going to be the starting balance for each of these back tests for phase two. Phase two is going to be, okay, now let's turn Social Security on, maximum possible benefit for Mary in this situation. And then let's reduce the rate of withdrawal. Okay. Because now she's taking Social Security, we can reduce that rate of withdrawal, and let's see how the portfolio is recovered after 2009. So really from 2010 through year to date 2025. Let's see what happens here. One thing I want to point out is I want to show you the cash flow coming out at the end of 2009 was $131,000. Okay. So we started with, about 104 and some change, and then it inflated over time. So 131 is that cash flow need in 2009. We're going to adjust that for inflation, but then her Social Security benefit, again, this is based on our financial planning calculator that we use in our tool. Her Social Security benefit was estimated to be $66,083. So it's essentially half. Like, we're basically cutting her spending by half from her portfolio, because now half of her income is going to come from the Social Security benefit. So I just wanted to point that out, because that's the amount that's going to reduce that cash flow by in 2010, in hopes that it will rescue and recover this portfolio a little bit. So now we're going to start with the 60-40 portfolio here. We're going to look at the 60-40 first. This one was in the lead. We had an initial balance of 1.3 million, roughly. Remember, at the end of 2009, after the end of the lost decade, took a little bit of a beating. Portfolio was sitting at 1.3 million, but now we're going to back down that withdrawal all the way down to 5,480. So just for fun on that one, let's see what that new starting rate of withdrawal is. Okay, so if we take 5,480, multiply that by 12, we've got 65,760. Let's divide that in to 1,338,423. That gives us a new rate of withdrawal in phase two of 4.9%. Okay, I'm writing here with my mouse, so my apologies on that, but that's 4.9% is the starting rate of withdrawal in that phase two. So kind of interesting. We have reduced withdrawals, but as a percentage, it's kind of hovered about the same. Like, a lot of people have this assumption, and myself included as a planner, of, withdrawals are going to go down when Social Security begins. That is true, but if the portfolio takes a little bit of a beating as a percentage when you restart that phase in that phase two after the bridge period is over, who knows what your rate of withdrawal will be at that point. But the good news is 4.9 is not super aggressive. It's not like she's at 7 or 7.5%. 4.9 with a 60-40 portfolio should be sustainable for a period of time. Okay, so let's see what happens though. Let's look at the stress test. We're going to actually look at year over year in this report. You know the drill. These are very detailed. Every month returns are all the returns by month are in here. We have the inflation that's embedded in here. But one of the things I'll point out is inflation has been so tame, or was so tame, for such a long period of time. And then 2021, right? 2021, 2022, 2023 came down a little bit. 2024, I think everyone's feeling the inflation effects overall. So I mean, yes, these numbers aren't like they were in like the 80s, when double-digit inflation, but 7%, 6.5%, 3.3, well above the Fed's target. The Fed's targeting 2%, and we're now kind of seeing that inflation rate tick up. And the question is tariffs, the Fed mandate with unemployment versus versus inflation. Like, what are they going to do? Are they going to cut 2 more times in 2025? There's some uncertainty there. So who knows what the future holds with inflation? I think the tariff story is going to take years to really settle out the impact. But I just wanted to point that out because inflation's ticking up a little bit. Okay. And the question is, what is going to be the average rate of inflation over the next 20 to 30 years? But if you look at the total rate of return on this, we only had really 3 blips in the radar over the last 15 years. 2015 was pretty much a moot point, 1.17% down. That's not too bad. 2018 minus 5%. Okay, the majority of that came in the fourth quarter. October, December. Really, that was Trump's first the trade war against China. That was what caused that volatility in the fourth quarter. And then 2022, we all remember the triple bear market, minus 16% in 2022. But if you look at this one, the cash flows, adjusted for inflation each and every year. So we're not even assuming a reduction of spending. And look at the balance, $2,079,000 so far year to date. Now we're sitting here in 2025 in October. So I would say overall, that 60-40 portfolio did its job quite well, even by delaying Social Security until the end of the lost decade. So keep that number in mind, $2,079,000. That's for the 60-40 portfolio. What about the 75-25? Remember that first lost decade, or in that lost decade, The balance dropped down a little bit below that mark for the 60-40 portfolio because of the higher equity exposure. So they were sitting at 1.1 million to start. Same thing, the monthly withdrawals went down because of that difference, or that the Social Security benefit beginning. And let's stress test that one. 5480 times 12. So that's 65,760. Divide that into 1105,688. Now they're sitting at a starting rate of withdrawal during phase 2 after the bridge period of 5.9%. A little bit higher. I'm not super worried about this because a 75-25 portfolio over the long run should do okay. I mean, 75% in equity should outperform the 60-40 portfolio. And now we have the lost decade behind us. This should do okay, but who really knows, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're looking at this with 2020 vision here, but 5.9% starting rate of withdrawal might be a little unnerving for some people, but let's see how this one played out. Cash flows increasing with inflation every year, started with that $1.1 million number and ended. Now we're sitting here in October of 2025, sitting here at $1,767,000. Okay. Not too bad. I would say overall, I think an investor would take this. A retiree, 25 years, they've been retired. Their portfolio has dipped down from $2 million to about $1.7 million. Obviously, that does not account for inflation. So if you really inflation adjust that, it probably feels like a little bit less, maybe like $1 million. Okay. But still, they're feeling like, hey, I have $1.7 million in the bank. This individual, let's say Mary, did retire at 60 back in 2000. She's now 85 years old. So does she need the same spending capacity as she did during her go-go years or even her slow-go years? Probably not, but she probably wants a little bit of a buffer or nest egg to protect against things like longevity risk or inflation risk or even long-term care risk. So definitely still a good story. Overall, a success, in my opinion, for the 75-25. Let's look at the 95-5. So obviously the balance took the biggest beating here. And so if we take that withdrawal amount, 65,760, and then we divide that into 790, 406, that's a starting withdrawal in phase 2 after the bridge period of 8.3%. That's a little unnerving for me. Looking at this one, we need this portfolio to probably last another 20 years. Remember, Mary's only 70 at this point in time. We need this portfolio to last another 20 years. Is that sustainable? We shall see. Okay, let's fast forward. We know hindsight's 2020. We know the stock market has done quite well. So returns have been very, very strong for the 95-5. Overall, the balance has basically hovered around flat, maybe a little bit positive. Okay, you're sitting at $967,000. So overall, the portfolio was able to recover a little bit with that 95-5, but certainly a 60-40 and a 75-25 portfolio was better off relative to this 95-5. Okay, that's taking Social Security at 70. Remember, the question that we wanted to answer is, hey, is there value in taking Social Security at 62 versus 70? Meaning, let's take the lowest possible Social Security benefit at 62 instead of delaying it until 70, and therefore we can try to rescue the portfolio from these sequence of returns risk that this investor, this individual Mary, experienced during those early 2000s. So we're going to do the same thing. Go a little faster here. We're going to start with $2 million. Phase 1, though, this bridge period is only going to be 3 years. Now we only have from 2000, 2001, and 2002. So we have 3 years of a bridge period. Okay, we're going to start with that rate of withdrawal of 5.17%. During that period of time, we're going to do the same thing, 60-40, 75-25, and then 95-5. And let's look at all three of these side by side. So kind of the same story here, because again, we know what happened in the early 2000s. Bonds did quite well because stocks are selling off. When stocks sell off, generally speaking, safe money performs well. Generally speaking, I say, because we're just coming off the heels of 2025 where stocks sold off and then bonds were down 15%. Like, you might be like, Kevin, bonds are awful, right? That recency bias. But in general, bonds perform quite well during volatility because when people sell stocks, they generally buy things that are more safe, in that case, bonds, and therefore that pushes the price of bonds up by pushing yields down. Okay, so same story here. The 60-40 portfolio is in the lead, 1.392, only after 3 years, by the way. So that's just a little unnerving, and that's why Mary might decide to take Social Security at 62, because she's looking at the balance. It went down $608,000 after 3 years. And she was only taking out 5.17%. That might be a little unnerving. So it would make sense for her to have this thought of, you know what, I'm going to just start taking Social Security early to try to rescue my portfolio. So again, I want to highlight those numbers just look at those three numbers, 1.3 million, 1.2, and then $1 million for each of those portfolios. And then now we're going to enter into phase two, which is after the bridge period. Social Security is going to turn on, but at a lower dollar amount. Okay, so I just want to point this out here, is that the year before cash flow, at the end of 2002, the need was 110. Estimated Social Security benefit at 62 the following year is going to be just under 30. Okay, so she'll need about 80, we'll call it 80, to withdraw from the portfolio in all three scenarios. Let's see how that played out. Okay, so again, now phase two, we're going to start with the 60-40 allocation. We're going to have a start date of January of 2003, and we're going to go through year to date 2025. We've got an initial balance of 1.392. This portfolio, like I said, was in the lead after that bridge period. And let's stress test the rate of withdrawal during this phase two. Let's take 6757, multiply that by 12, and let's divide that number. That's 81,084. Let's divide that number by 1392412. That's a starting rate of withdrawal of about 5.8%. A little bit higher than that withdrawal rate that we started in the other scenario with the 60-40 bridge until 70. So just keep that in mind, is that Social Security reduction did make a significant impact on that starting rate of withdrawal. It did not cut it down very much, okay? But it certainly rescued it a little bit, by the amount of 30,000. Let's see how this plays out. So we've got 2003 all the way through 2025. We've got the cash flow starting at about 80, adjusted for inflation every single year through 2025. Okay, we're not done with 2025, but we're sitting here in October. The balance did recover a good bit. The balance recovered, started at about that $1.3 million number and recovered all the way to 1.9 million. So this investor, this did its job as well for Mary. So she could have absolutely started Social Security at 62 and rescued her portfolio a little bit. But how did that stack up against that other scenario where Mary bridged it until 70, delayed her benefit until 70, and received that much higher benefit? Okay. But what about the other two portfolios? Now that we know that, hey, the 75-25 and then the 95-5, those outperformed from a rate of return standpoint over the last 15 years. Let's see how those shook out. So let's go to the 75-25, an initial balance of 1.2 million. We've got that 81,084. Divide that into the 122,127. So now we're sitting at a starting rate of withdrawal of about 6.6%. Okay, also a little bit higher. But again, peace of mind. Maybe that does provide some peace of mind to start that Social Security, stop the bleeding a little bit on those aggressive withdrawals early on. Let's see how that portfolio recovered. 1.6 million. Okay, so it recovered okay. Not too bad. And we're going to stack rank all these here in just a second, so bear with me. And then last but not least, we've got the 95-5. You might be thinking, Kevin, this one probably recovered so nicely, but, with that said, the balance was cut in half only after those 3 years. And so if we take 81,084, divide that into 101,7,858, that's a starting rate of withdrawal of basically 8%. I'm going to just call it 8%. So pretty aggressive. An average investor for 95.5, they would probably take 8% average over the next 10 to 15 years all day, every day. But 8% starting rate of withdrawal, as you can see, the portfolio didn't really recover very much. Why is that? It's because of that aggressive rate of withdrawal starting in that year one of this phase two. So we had that bridge period from 2000 to 2002 where Mary was taking that aggressive withdrawals from the portfolio. The markets dropped. We had 2 bear markets in 3 years. Now she's resetting her withdrawal because she started Social Security. But here's the story. Over the next 5 years, the investor experienced a very positive rate of return, significantly positive up until 2008. So this is the reason why this scenario of taking it at 62 did not move the needle very much, because actually delaying Social Security, letting the portfolio do what it's going to do, and allowing that Social Security benefit to increase in value was a better move. Okay. Let's actually stack rank all these. Let's look at 1 to 6. So as you can see, the top dog was 60-40 portfolio, claimed Social Security at 70. They started with 2 million and they finished with just over $2 million. Scenario 2, or number 2, was also the 60-40 portfolio, claiming it at 62. They finished with 1.9 million. And then we had 75-25. Claiming it at 70, 75-25 claiming it at 62. And then the 95-5s are rearing up the end here with 967 and 867 respectively, with that age 70 versus age 62. So interesting stuff here, in my opinion. Very interesting stuff. Okay. Because, ultimately, I think the idea around taking Social Security as a rescue strategy is like, hey, Social Security, if I go through a downturn, I'm going to go ahead and just start Social Security. That way I can stop the bleeding. But oftentimes you need to time that perfectly because, what if this individual did not start Social Security? What if Mary decided to delay Social Security? She was actually better off because those years from 2003 up until 2007, her portfolio recovered very, very nicely. So, it's very difficult. I would say it's nearly impossible to time that perfectly because if you start Social Security and then the markets recover, you might think like, you know what? I wish I just delayed Social Security, evidenced by these numbers here. The age 71 in all three scenarios and the age 70 at 60-40 was also the top dog out of all of the scenarios. Okay. So the other thing I would say is on that same note is if you do decide to claim early and then you messed up, at your full retirement age, you have the ability. There's a one-time option to stop your Social Security benefit and let that benefit compound and receive those delayed retirement credits up until age 70. So there is a one-time bogey, if you will, where you can stop that early Social Security benefit that you had started at your full retirement age and delay that until 70. One-time option, okay? But the other takeaway I would say is investment allocation mattered the most out of all of these scenarios, in all these scenarios, okay? More so than taking Social Security earlier or later. Okay. And, I say this because that recency bias is legitimate. Like, think about this. What has been the top dog over the last 20 years, or let's say certainly the last 15 years? It's been the S&P 500 or equities. Okay. What's been the lagger? It's been fixed income. And I see a lot of chatter around there around, why own bonds? What's the point of bonds? What's the point of fixed income? This is exactly the point of the fixed income is because during periods of volatility in general, 2022 is an exception. In periods of volatility, bonds should do their job and to provide against that sequence of returns risk protection. Okay. So just remember this because I think a lot of folks are kind of in that recency bias mode where they're like, I'm going to just be more aggressive. And I'm seeing this in our practice day in and day out. The retirees that I was working with 10 years ago, a lot more conservative and from an investment perspective because they're coming off the heels of what? The lost decade. Whereas investors retiring today, they're coming off the heels of the longest bull run in history from 2009 through 2021. So they're thinking, why would I ever own bonds? I'm going to just be aggressive and own all stocks. And a lot of you in PFR Nation, you have these feelings too, because I posted videos and I've seen the comments. Not saying get overly conservative and go all bonds. Definitely not saying that. But what I'm saying is come up with the investment risk that aligns with your risk tolerance, but also your risk capacity. Okay. What is your required rate of return to make your financial plan work, and start there and then work backwards based on those risk tolerance and risk capacity factors and factoring in other income sources like Social Security, like pension, and how that impacts your risk tolerance. I think that's the better way to go about it than just saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to use a 60-40 strategy because, Bill Bengen said so, or whoever said so that's a talking head, in the financial media. So come up with an investment strategy that makes sense for you. But being all stocks may not be the best strategy. Going too conservative, probably also not the best strategy either, because we have that inflation and longevity risk. Okay. But, I would say overall, it's impossible to predict, what type of market you're going to retire into. It's impossible to predict, hey, are you going to retire into, a market like 2006, right before the Great Recession? Or are you going to retire into a market like, in the 2010s, where we had this bull run for 15 years in stocks. So it's impossible to know exactly where you're going to fall. And that's why it's so important to have that process, have that process where you're coming up with a plan. You've got your investment strategy buttoned up to your retirement income goals. And then you're reviewing that on a systematic basis. And if the market does something that is unexpected, you have some levers to pull, whether it's claiming Social Security early or potentially adjusting your spending or rebalancing your portfolio using the bucketing strategy. There are so many ways you could hedge against the sequence of returns risk. Okay. But I think this back test is a perfect example of why that recency bias is a little dangerous, because not saying we're going to go through another lost decade, but if we go through a period of time where equities underperform and fixed income starts to pop a little bit, or US equities begin to underperform and international stocks begin to pop, this is why you want to have multiple asset classes. Even if over the last 5 to 10 years, you're looking at some of those asset classes and you're like, gosh, like, why did I own international stocks or why did I own bonds? Well, look at 2025. Who's winning? International stocks over US. And I'm not sitting here saying don't own US stocks. That's crazy. But what I'm saying is have a plan, have an asset allocation plan, and then review that on an ongoing basis. And listen, if you're in a situation, you're like, I'm sort of on an island doing this myself. Maybe you're lost in your spreadsheets, or you're just kind of stuck because you don't know how certain decisions are going to impact other decisions. We'd love to help you with this. I mean, this is what we do on a day in and day out basis in our practice. And so if you're in a scenario where you're over 50, you've saved in excess of $1 million, and you're looking to maximize your income, you want to fire your boss, you want to maximize your retirement income, minimize your lifetime tax bill, and worry less about money, we'd love to help you with that. And so if you're interested in learning more about working with our firm, you can visit our website at www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com, or you can just start with that retirement readiness questionnaire that is linked in the description in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you and see what's on your mind, see how we can help you plan for and execute a successful retirement. That's it for today, everybody. First live stream in the books. I appreciate all of you joining. Thank you for watching the video on the back end. If you found it helpful, make sure to like it. Make sure to share it with someone else who's in a similar boat that's in that PFR Nation sweet spot. And again, make sure to check out that episode that's coming out next Tuesday, where I'm going to do a little Q&A session, maybe from the golf course, although I've got a lot of golf planned over the next couple of weeks. I've logged 8 rounds in 2025. A little pathetic, but I have 8 rounds scheduled over the next 2 weeks. So starting off this weekend, we just had the Ryder Cup obviously last week, but starting this weekend, we've got our club's Haskew Cup, which is essentially our club versus another club locally here in Chattanooga. And it's my first one. Obviously, I'm a new member there, but I'm a little nervous, okay, because my game isn't in tip-top shape, but I've got 3 rounds scheduled this weekend. And then next week, I'm doing a golf trip with some friends to Macklemore. I've talked about Macklemore in the past. So we're super excited. But I've got a lot of golf planned over the next couple of weeks. I don't know if I'll be doing the Linkside chat with the Q&A, but make sure to check out the podcast next Tuesday. I'm going to be hitting on some of those great questions that you all put in the comment section in the video initially. And if you have more questions, if the Q&A sessions, we're going to keep that going. Every 5, 6, 7 episodes, we do a little Q&A session where I'll take some of the best questions that I've seen, whether it's in the YouTube or podcast or even just in our day-to-day practice working with clients. I will do episodes in the Q&A. So if you have a question that you want me to talk about in a podcast in the future, put it in the comment section. Just drop it right in there. We'd love to look at that, review that, and certainly weave that into a future episode. All right, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in the live stream, and we'll see you next week.